ahead. Have a seat. It happens often in the Gospels that when Jesus heals someone physically, he will say to them, your sins are forgiven instead. Which seems like a strange thing, like maybe Jesus doesn't know what's going on or what he's doing. But clearly he does. I mean, it's a pattern. And this forgiveness of sins seems to really bother, the Pharisees, the spiritual leaders a lot. Actually, a lot of the healings that Jesus does bother them. Either healing the wrong people, or healing the wrong time, or saying the wrong thing, and it bothers people. That's typical human nature, right? Like whenever we like to have everything under control, and we like to expect life to be a certain way. And when anyone sort of rocks the boat, we get all angry with people. But why does Jesus say forgiveness of sins, right? And then he's criticized for it, and he says, well, rise up and walk, and the man gets up anyways. I mean, part of this is to show that when Jesus heals people, he heals the whole person. He doesn't just, heal someone physically, right? He didn't just come, I said this before, he didn't just come to earth so people could have, like, free bread and stuff like that, and see somebody walk in water and go, ooh, that's really cool, right? That's not why he came, and if that's what he came, I mean, it's amazing, but it's not really significant. And what we see Jesus doing is healing people, healing the whole person. I was reading, one of the gospel readings during the week was about when when the woman of the issue of blood, right, when she touches the hem of his garment. Remember that story? She's bleeding for 12 years, she's unclean, so she shouldn't be out among the people. She goes out anyway, she touches the hem of his garment, and she's healed immediately, and then she's called out by Jesus and stuff like that. Well, that woman, I mean, she didn't just get a healing from her bodily ailment, right? I mean, she had this terrible sickness that she was dealing with for over a decade. But she was healed in other ways too, right? Because she was freed from her shame. She was freed from her isolation, right? She was freed from just being oppressed by having a sickness and being sort of, especially in that time, right? The sickness was seen as sort of some sort of judgment from God, She was delivered from all of these other things too. And so when Jesus comes to heal us, he comes to heal the whole person, right? Every aspect of who we are, both physical and spiritual. And in this particular case, I think we should ask ourselves, what's the greater miracle, right? That this man who was paralyzed was able to get up and walk and use his legs again, or that he was forgiven. And I would argue that the greater miracle is that that man received forgiveness. And I don't just mean, oh, well, we should say that because that's the right answer, right? That's the right spiritual answer. But I really mean this. Like, to walk around in our daily lives holding resentment and withholding forgiveness from people, right? Or having incredible amounts of guilt and shame and not feeling forgiven, right? Is far more oppressive and debilitating than not having the use of your legs. I mean, you see people who have disabilities all the time, and they can often be far more happy than someone who has all of their faculties about them, right? I mean, happiness is not sort of limited by the use of our legs, right? It's internal. It's our attitude, how we perceive the world, how we look at life. I mean, these kind of things really determine whether or not we feel fulfilled, right? Whether or not we actually have a life that's meaningful in some way. And in this case, I would argue that the forgiveness of sins is the greater miracle here, right? It's the greater miracle. Just like I would argue when Jesus multiplies the loaves and feeds the 5,000, the greater miracle there is not that the bread miraculously multiplied, though that is amazing, right? The greater miracle is that people voluntarily brought up their own bread and their own fish and shared it with strangers, right? When they weren't doing that at first, right? Like, that's the greater miracle, is love. And so in this case, the greater miracle is forgiveness. Forgiveness is, forgiveness is something that's in all religions. It's out, it's an aspect there. But in Christianity, it's right at the bedrock. I mean, it's the very reason that Jesus comes down to earth, is to put us back in a right relationship with God and a right relationship with other people. And key to that is forgiveness. I think one of the markers of someone who's truly a Christian, who really understands the gospel, and someone who isn't, is that person's ability to receive forgiveness and to readily give forgiveness out to other people. And being able to forgive other people and to accept forgiveness from others it requires practice. It's not something that just comes naturally, right? You have to practice that so that you're a person of forgiveness. And if you've ever received forgiveness in any way, right, when you felt great guilt and shame, and you were truly blameworthy, and you received genuine forgiveness, you feel what? You feel freed. You feel free, right? You feel light. You feel like something, scales came off your eyes. You feel transformed. You know, we don't have this really in our tradition, but like evangelicals, right, they have this whole like, you know, conversion experience, right? Maybe you've talked to someone who's evangelical and they like, you know, they want you to say a prayer with them and give your life to Jesus and have one of those sort of like experiences, you know. And we don't have that, but we usually, when they're talking about that, what they're talking about, when someone's had a religious experience, it's almost always an experience of forgiveness, okay? And whether it's, you know, one great experience or multiple experiences through our lives, when people have an encounter with God, right, and it changes their lives, it's almost always an experience of being forgiven or feeling forgiven from something. And in our lives, we need forgiveness all the time because we're always messing up and falling short of our own expectations, the expectations of other people. But something deeper than that, when we are able to receive forgiveness from God, right, when we're able to receive some sort of kind of ultimate forgiveness, right, that covers everything, there is something so deeply satisfying, something that touches the core of who we are as people, that there can almost be an experience of ecstasy with it. That's why people have these incredible religious experiences at times, because when you truly have an experience of forgiveness, it can be earth-shattering for you. Because it is so free and transformative. It just like it takes all the weight right off your shoulders for you. The gospel, the word gospel means good news. Right? Jesus came to give good news, and central to the good news is that you can be forgiven and that you can forgive other people. Brothers and sisters, that is very good news, right? That this message of forgiveness is one of the things about Christianity that we can confidently share with other people because it's truly good, right? It's truly good news. And the challenge before you and me is to become people who know how to receive God's forgiveness. And it would seem that it would be an easy thing to receive forgiveness from other people, right? But it isn't always, because sometimes we won't let ourselves be forgiven, right? We feel too bad about ourselves, right? We have too much guilt and shame. We don't think we're worthy of someone else's forgiveness. Or we've been so hurt before that we're skeptical of anyone's forgiveness, as if it's really genuine or not, right? So we don't believe it. There are so many things that in our hearts get in the way of us actually receiving forgiveness in some way. And so it's not an easy thing. And neither is giving forgiveness. Sometimes, you know, I hear confessions, and it often comes up where people want to forgive people, but they can't. They just can't get themselves to do it, right? It's not easy. You can't just make yourself do that, right? And so what you have to do is you have to train for it. You have to practice it. You have to make forgiveness something that's a part of your everyday life, so that you can be a person who enjoys that beautiful gift from God of being forgiven. There is nothing more beautiful than that. So here's my advice I would give to you, is how to practice this. Is I would start out with the really small things, right? So that eventually you can work on to the really big things when the forgiveness of someone else really matters. So oftentimes we have these annoyances where someone offends us or says something, and it bothers us for part of the day, and then eventually we just dismiss it, right? Say, yeah, it's not a big deal. Push it aside. I would say those are perfect opportunities for you to start off by saying aloud to yourself at the end of the day, you know, Lord, I forgive, you know, I forgive Yuri for what he said to me, you know? And you need to take those opportunities and say out loud to yourself, in your private, maybe in your own prayers, end of the day, verbally say that you forgive that person. Even if it seems like a petty or minor thing, right? But do it anyways, because it's practice. Say it out loud. Say, Lord, and ask God, help me to forgive this person, right? And just do that as a practice. Every day, whenever you find that someone's done something that's bothered you, offended you, or hurt you in a small way. You start off with the small ones. Eventually, you'll be able to do it in a little bit bigger issues where maybe you need to, go ask someone's forgiveness, or maybe you need to actually grant that person forgiveness. You actually have to have a real encounter and a conversation with someone because maybe you're not talking or there's some sort of like argument that you have. So you start off small. You start off practicing saying it to yourself. And then when it needs to be, you say it to other people. You know, hey, we had an argument, I'm sorry, please forgive me. And what's important is you have to say the words, forgive me, right? We say all the time, we say sorry, or we say sorry, and then what does someone say back to you? Say, oh, forgive me, I'm sorry. What's the American response?
It's okay.
It's okay. Don't say that. Don't say that. Or it's not a big deal. Or you don't need to be forgiven. Don't rob somebody of the opportunity to really receive a forgiveness from you. Okay? It seems like we're doing someone a favor by saying it's not that big of a deal. But you aren't doing them a favor. Okay? We need to have the exchanges in our lives, you know, especially with those who we're close with, right? Our family and friends, people we interact daily with. We're always offending each other. We need to practice saying, forgive me, sorry. And the other person responding back, thank you, I forgive you. That's how you put relationships right. When you don't do that, right? These little small things, it's like you have a big jar in your heart, right? These little small things build up, right? These little resentments, these little offenses, bit by bit, they build up, right? And pretty soon, there's not much room left in your heart for love for that person because it's full of all these offenses and resentments that you did think were a big deal. And maybe they weren't, but when they build up and they add up to a lot. And so it's important to make sure that we're intentionally forgiving and asking forgiveness for all these little things that we have. And if we do that, we will begin to live lives that are truly free in light and lives the way that God meant us to live them. Because forgiveness is the good news. Forgiveness is good news. Glory to Jesus Christ.